The charred edges of the phone caught the afternoon light as Mary Peterson's weathered hands trembled. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Duke's behavior confirmed it. The retired K9 German Shepherd wasn't just alert. He was frantic, pawing at the forest floor with desperate intensity, his normally calm demeanor replaced by low growls punctuated with anxious whines. "What is it, boy?" Mary whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves of the Olympic National Forest. Duke's ears pricked forward, his body tense as a bowstring. Sarah, her granddaughter, crouched beside her, police instincts immediately engaged. "That phone was deliberately burned," she murmured, gloved fingers carefully turning the device over. The screen, cracked and blackened, suddenly flickered to life. A ghostly resurrection. A partial message appeared. "Help, Tra." In that moment, as three pairs of eyes fixed on those desperate letters, Duke threw his head back and released a howl that echoed through the ancient trees, not the call of a domestic animal, but the primordial warning of a creature who has scented death. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Mary Peterson hadn't planned on sharing her twilight years with a four-legged companion, let alone a retired police dog with his own set of nightmares. At 63, the former trauma nurse had settled into the small cedar cabin on the outskirts of Olympic National Forest after her husband Robert's sudden death 3 years prior. The property, with its wraparound porch and view of the mountains, was meant to be their retirement sanctuary. Instead, it became Mary's solitary refuge. Until Duke arrived. Duke had saved her life during a home invasion 18 months ago. The 9-year-old German Shepherd had been visiting with Sarah when an intruder broke in seeking prescription medications. While Mary froze in terror, Duke reverted to his training, incapacitating the man until help arrived. When Sarah later mentioned Duke was being retired due to arthritis, Mary surprised herself by offering to adopt him. They recognized something in each other. Survivors with private pains, finding comfort in quiet companionship. Sarah Peterson had her grandmother's determination and her father's sharp eyes. At 33, she'd dedicated her life to the K9 unit, specializing in missing persons cases. The career choice wasn't random. 20 years ago, Sarah's parents were murdered in their home, a case that remained unsolved. Sarah lived 40 minutes away in Port Angeles, visiting every weekend with Max, her Belgian Malinois partner, a young dog with remarkable tracking abilities. Those weekend visits had become sacred ritual, forest walks where 4 souls, 2 human, 2 canine, found temporary peace among towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks. Kevin Richards lived in the nearest property to Mary's, a half-mile down the winding road. The charming widower in his early 50s often helped with repairs around Mary's cabin, bringing fresh-baked bread and local gossip. His thoughtfulness made Mary's isolation bearable, though Duke had always maintained a curious reserve around the man. Mary's cabin held subtle reminders of her 30-year nursing career at Harbor Medical Center's trauma unit. Certifications hung modestly in the hallway, while a small box in her bedroom closet contained thank-you notes from patients whose lives she'd helped save. She never spoke about the other patients, the ones with haunted eyes and suspicious injuries, the ones whose stories kept her awake on stormy nights, the ones who reminded her that evil often wore a friendly face. The weekend had begun like any other. Saturday morning brought Sarah's dusty SUV up the gravel driveway, Max's eager face pressed against the passenger window. Mary had prepared a thermos of hot coffee and packed turkey sandwiches, her arthritis medication tucked discreetly in her jacket pocket. Duke greeted his former colleague with dignified restraint, though his wagging tail betrayed his excitement. "Perfect day for a hike," Sarah remarked, squinting up at the clear October sky. "The trail to Cedar Creek should be beautiful with the fall colors." She was dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, but Mary noticed the subtle bulge of her service weapon beneath her light jacket. Some habits never faded, even on days off. The four set out just after 10, following the familiar trail that wound behind Mary's property into the national forest. Duke and Max led the way, occasionally stopping to investigate interesting scents, while the women followed at a comfortable pace. Mary treasured these moments, watching her granddaughter's face soften away from the pressures of her job, the tension gradually easing from Sarah's shoulders with each step deeper into the woods. "How's work?" Mary asked, carefully navigating a root-covered section of the path. Sarah's expression tightened. "Busy. 3 missing persons cases this month alone, young women, all between 18 and 25. She hesitated. "The latest one, Alina Davis, disappeared 6 days ago, left her apartment to go jogging and never came back." Mary nodded, all too familiar with Sarah's tendency to carry her cases with her. "You'll find her," she said with quiet confidence. They had walked for nearly an hour when the dog's behavior suddenly changed. Max, who had been ranging ahead on the trail, stopped abruptly, nose twitching. Duke, typically more reserved, pushed past the younger dog, hackles rising. "Max, what is it?" Sarah called, her relaxed demeanor instantly shifting to alert watchfulness. Both dogs veered off the established trail, heading deeper into a dense section of underbrush. Sarah and Mary exchanged concerned glances before following. The terrain grew rougher, fallen logs and thick ferns impeding their progress. When they caught up to the dogs, Max was methodically working an area of disturbed earth, while Duke stood rigidly at attention, his focus fixed on something partially buried. Sarah knelt beside Max, pulling latex gloves from her pocket, another habit of her profession. "There's something here," she murmured, carefully brushing away leaves and soil to reveal the burned phone. Mary watched as her granddaughter examined the device with professional detachment. "Deliberately destroyed," Sarah noted, pointing to the melted charging port. "Someone wanted to eliminate any data on this fast, but didn't have time to dispose of it properly." Duke's behavior grew increasingly agitated. Unlike Max's focused investigation, Duke seemed distressed, alternating between protective stances near Mary and urgent movements toward the deeper forest. "I've never seen him act this way," Mary said, resting her hand on Duke's back to calm him. "Not since—" She stopped, remembering how he'd reacted during the home invasion, sensing danger before it became visible. Sarah carefully placed the phone in an evidence bag she produced from her jacket. "This could be nothing, but—" "But you don't think so," Mary finished. After 30 years of nursing, she recognized the look of someone connecting disturbing dots. Sarah hesitated. "This area is less than 3 miles from where Elena Davis was last seen jogging." Duke's sudden bark startled them both. The retired K-9 was now facing a barely visible game trail leading further into the forest, his posture rigid with alertness. "He wants us to follow," Mary said, recognizing the training stance Duke had maintained even in retirement. Sarah pulled out her phone, checking the signal. "I should call this in first." The brief conversation with dispatch revealed institutional inertia. Without concrete evidence, Sarah's discovery of a burned phone wasn't prioritized. "They're sending a patrol car to collect the phone, but not for several hours," she reported with poorly concealed frustration. Max had now joined Duke's focused attention on the game trail. Both dogs displayed the unmistakable body language of tracking something significant. "I should wait here for the patrol," Sarah said reluctantly, though her eyes followed the dog's intent gaze. Mary surprised herself by saying, "I think we need to see what they've found." Something in Duke's demeanor spoke to her, an urgency she couldn't ignore. "You're armed, and I was a trauma nurse for 30 years. If someone's hurt out there—" Sarah wavered, professional protocol wrestling with instinct. "Just a short distance," she finally agreed. "But at the first sign of anything dangerous, we turn back and call for proper backup." They followed the dogs deeper into the forest, leaving the established trails behind. Mary felt a growing sense of dread as the woods thickened around them, the afternoon light filtering greenly through the canopy overhead. Duke moved with surprising agility despite his age, leading them with grim determination toward something that Mary increasingly feared they weren't prepared to find. The forest grew denser as they followed the dogs, sunlight filtering through the canopy in diminishing patches. Sarah moved with the cautious precision of her training, while Mary fought to keep pace despite her protesting joints. Duke maintained his focused urgency, stopping occasionally to ensure Mary was still following. After 20 minutes of difficult terrain, Mac suddenly froze, issuing a low, warning growl. Sarah immediately signaled Mary to stop, her hand moving instinctively to her weapon. "Stay here with Duke," Sarah whispered, nodding toward a large cedar. "I need to check what Max has found." Mary watched as her granddaughter and the Belgian Malinois advanced carefully through a thicket of salal bushes. She placed a reassuring hand on Duke's head, feeling the tension in his powerful frame. "It's okay, boy," she murmured, though she didn't believe her own words. Minutes stretched like hours until Sarah reappeared, her face ashen. "I need you to stay here while I call this in," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "We've found a cabin, well hidden, recently used. She hesitated, glancing at Mary's former profession. "There are restraints inside, and blood, recent." Mary's nursing instincts surfaced immediately. "Is someone hurt? I should—" "No," Sarah cut her off firmly. "No one's there now, but this is an active crime scene. I'm calling for backup." She moved away, speaking urgently into her phone while Mary absorbed the implications. Duke whined softly, pressing against Mary's leg. The afternoon shadows lengthened as they waited, Sarah pacing in tight circles after her call, clearly struggling with professional patience. "They're sending a full team," she finally explained, "but it will take at least 40 minutes for them to reach us." As they waited, Sarah's phone rang. Her expression darkened as she listened. "That was my lieutenant," she said after disconnecting. "The burned phone we found belongs to Elena Davis. They confirmed through the serial number." Mary felt a chill despite the mild afternoon. "You're missing Jogger." Sarah nodded grimly. "Now they're taking this seriously." She hesitated before adding, "There's something else. When I described the location and setup of the cabin, my lieutenant mentioned similarities to an old case. A trafficking operation they busted about 15 years ago. Same region, similar M.O. Something stirred in Mary's memory. Patients she'd treated years ago at Harbor Medical Center. Young women with defensive wounds, malnutrition, and the vacant stare of profound trauma. She'd suspected trafficking then, had even reported her concerns, but nothing had come of it. "I treat girls like that," Mary said softly. "Around 2010, 3 young women brought in over a 6-month period. They wouldn't talk about what happened, but their injuries told the story." Sarah's attention sharpened. "You never mentioned this." "Doctor-patient confidentiality," Mary replied. "And afterward, it wasn't something I wanted to remember." She paused, remembering. "There was one girl who had a distinctive scar. Deliberate cutting, not accidental. When I asked about it, she panicked so severely we had to sedate her." The distant sound of vehicles broke the moment. Soon the narrow forest trail filled with law enforcement personnel, evidence technicians, detectives, and canine units. Mary found herself shepherded back toward the main path while Sarah conferred with her superiors, occasionally glancing back at her grandmother with concern. As daylight waned, Mary and Duke were escorted back to the trailhead by a young officer. Sarah would remain at the scene, she explained, promising to come by Mary's cabin as soon as she could. The drive home was silent, Duke unusually subdued in the back seat of the patrol car. When they arrived, Mary was surprised to see Kevin's truck in her driveway. "Everything okay, Mary?" he called, approaching with a casserole dish. "I saw all the commotion down at the trailhead and got worried." "Just some police business," Mary replied vaguely, suddenly reluctant to share details. Duke, normally indifferent to Kevin, positioned himself between Mary and her neighbor, his posture subtly protective. Kevin's eyes narrowed slightly at the dog's behavior. "Well, I brought dinner. Figured you might need it after all the excitement." Mary thanked him, accepting the dish while maintaining a strange new awareness of the distance between them. Something about Kevin's casual interest in the police activity triggered a faint warning bell, the same instinct that had helped her identify domestic violence victims who claimed to have fallen downstairs. After Kevin left, Mary locked her doors, something she rarely did before dark, and settled on the porch with Duke, waiting for Sarah's return. As twilight deepened into night, her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Forget what you saw today, for your granddaughter's sake." Mary's hand shook as she showed the message to Sarah when she finally arrived near midnight. Sarah's expression hardened as she read it, immediately calling her lieutenant. "Someone knows we found the cabin," Sarah said after ending the call, "and they know who we are." She paced Mary's living room, exhaustion warring with adrenaline. "The cabin is definitely connected to Elena's disappearance. They found her hair, blood, and fingerprints inside." "You're staying here tonight," Mary insisted, already preparing the guest room. Later, after Sarah had finally succumbed to exhaustion, Mary sat at her kitchen table, a forgotten cup of tea growing cold before her. Duke lay at her feet, alert despite the late hour. Something nagged at the edges of her memory, a connection she couldn't quite grasp. On impulse, she retrieved a box from her closet filled with old journals from her nursing days. Flipping through entries from 2010, she found what she was looking for: notes about the 3 young women she'd treated. Reading between the professional lines, a pattern emerged. All 3 had been found near Olympic National Forest. All 3 had been quietly closed without resolution. As she closed the journal, Mary noticed Duke staring intently at the window. Following his gaze, she caught a brief movement in the shadows near the tree line, the unmistakable outline of a figure watching her house. There and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. But Duke's low growl confirmed what her racing heart already knew. Their discovery in the forest had awakened something dangerous, something that now had Mary and her family in its sights. Morning arrived with painful slowness. Mary had dozed fitfully in her armchair, Duke maintaining vigilant watch at her feet. Sarah emerged from the guest room at dawn, instantly alert to her grandmother's exhaustion. "You didn't sleep," she stated rather than asked. Mary gestured toward her journals, still open on the coffee table. "I found my notes from those cases. All 3 victims were found within a 10-mile radius of where we discovered that cabin yesterday." Sarah examined the faded entries, her law enforcement training evident in her methodical review. "These injuries, they're consistent with captivity and abuse. The same patterns I recognized then," Mary confirmed. "But when I reported my suspicions to the authorities, nothing happened. The detective who took my statement said they were likely drug users who'd gotten into bad situations." "What detective?" Sarah asked sharply. Mary frowned, trying to recall. "Reynolds, I think. Thomas Reynolds." Sarah's face tightened. "Reynolds retired 5 years ago, under investigation for evidence tampering, though nothing was ever proven." The implication hung heavy between them. Mary rose stiffly, moving to the kitchen to start coffee. "You need to tell me everything about yesterday. What exactly did you find in that cabin?" Sarah followed, leaning against the counter as the coffee brewed. "It was well hidden. You wouldn't spot it unless you were practically on top of it. Reinforced door, windows blacked out. Inside was basic but functional: cots, a chemical toilet, propane stove." She hesitated. "And equipment consistent with holding people against their will. Restraints, sedatives, a camera setup. And you're certain it's connected to your missing jogger. Her blood was there, and her hair. The lab is processing everything else we found: fingerprints, fibers, additional DNA." Sarah accepted the mug Mary offered. "What bothers me is how professionally it was done. This wasn't some improvised operation. Whoever did this has experience. Mary thought of the threatening text message. And resources. They knew who we were immediately. Duke suddenly raised his head, ears forward. A moment later, they heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Sarah moved to the window, hand hovering near her weapon. "It's Kevin," she reported, relaxing slightly. Mary remembered Duke's unusual behavior toward her neighbor the previous evening. "Sarah, does Kevin know what you do, that you work specifically with missing persons?" Sarah considered this. "I don't think so. He knows I'm a canine officer, but I've never discussed my specialization with him." A knock sounded at the door. Duke rose, positioning himself between the door and Mary with a low rumble in his throat. "Morning, ladies," Kevin called through the screen door, all friendly concern. "Just checking in after all the excitement yesterday. Brought some fresh eggs from my chickens." Sarah opened the door, accepting the carton with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's thoughtful of you, Kevin." Mary noticed how Kevin's gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on her open journal before focusing on Sarah's service weapon, still holstered at her side. "Quite the police presence out there yesterday," he remarked casually. "Anything folks should be worried about?" "Just routine," Sarah replied smoothly. "Training exercise that turned up some evidence from an old case." Kevin nodded, seemingly satisfied, though Mary caught something flickering behind his eyes. Calculation, perhaps? "Well, if you need anything, I'm just down the road." He smiled at Mary. "Those security cameras we talked about last month might be worth considering now, Mary. Never know what might wander out of those woods." After he left, Sarah turned to her grandmother. "What cameras?" "He suggested installing a security system after that bear was spotted near my chicken coop," Mary explained. "I didn't think it necessary, but he was quite insistent." Sarah frowned. "I don't like it, and I don't like Duke's reaction to him. Duke was a detection dog, trained to alert on everything from drugs to human remains. If he's suspicious of Kevin—" "He saved my life once," Mary reminded her. "The night of the break-in, if Duke senses something wrong." Sarah nodded, already reaching for her phone. "I'm going to run a background check on our friendly neighbor." While Sarah made calls, Mary took Duke outside for his morning routine. The forest edge loomed darker than usual, and Mary couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Duke stayed unusually close, his body language alert and protective. Back inside, Sarah was frowning at her laptop screen. Kevin Richards, age 54, divorced, no children, moved here 8 years ago from Idaho. No criminal record. She scrolled further. Owns a construction company specializing in remote and specialty buildings. "Such as hidden cabins?" Mary suggested. "Possibly." Sarah continued reading. "Prior to Idaho, he lived in Oregon, and before that, Montana. Always rural areas, always near national forests or parks." A pattern was emerging, though still frustratingly vague. Mary retrieved her journal again. "The last victim I treated, the one with the deliberate scar. She mentioned a man who said he built special places where no one could find them. I included it in my notes because it seemed significant." Sarah's phone rang, interrupting their speculation. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she listened. When she disconnected, she turned to Mary with troubled eyes. "That was my lieutenant. The lab results show the cabin was used to hold at least 3 different women recently. Alina Davis was definitely there, along with 2 others we haven't identified yet." She paused. "They also found partial fingerprints matching another missing persons case from last year. A 22-year-old student who disappeared from a hiking trail near Mount Rainier." "This isn't new," Mary said softly. "This has been happening for years, and somehow staying under the radar." Sarah's frustration was evident. "I've been working missing persons for 7 years, and I never connected these cases." Because they were designed not to be connected, Mary realized. Different jurisdictions, different times of year, victims with no obvious similarities except age and gender. Sarah closed her laptop decisively. I need to get back to the station. We're coordinating with the FBI now. This is all the hallmarks of a trafficking operation. She looked at her grandmother with concern. I don't want you staying here alone, not after that text message. I'll be fine, Mary insisted. I have Duke. At least let me set up a patrol car to drive by regularly, Sarah countered, and keep your doors locked. Don't go into the forest alone, not even with Duke. After extracting Mary's promise, Sarah departed, leaving the house feeling emptier than usual. Duke padded from window to window, his vigilance both reassuring and unsettling. Mary tried to occupy herself with mundane tasks, laundry, bread-making, organizing her pantry, but her thoughts kept returning to the cabin in the woods and the women who had suffered there. In the afternoon, as Mary was hanging sheets on the clothesline, Duke suddenly went rigid, his attention fixed on the tree line. Mary froze, scanning the forest edge, but saw nothing unusual among the swaying firs. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, moving closer to the house. Duke's growl deepened, and he positioned himself between Mary and the perceived threat. Seconds stretched into minutes with no visible danger, but Mary trusted Duke's instincts enough to retreat indoors, locking the door behind them. As evening approached, Sarah called with an update. "We've identified one of the other DNA samples from the cabin. Melissa Tanner, reported missing from Portland 3 months ago. The FBI has taken lead on the investigation, and they're bringing in additional resources." "What about the threatening text?" Mary asked. A brief pause. "We traced it to a burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store in Tacoma. Dead end for now, but we've increased patrols in your area." After disconnecting, Mary prepared a simple dinner, sharing some chicken with Duke. The shadows lengthened outside her windows, and she found herself double-checking the locks more frequently than she cared to admit. Duke remained unusually alert, his attention shifting between the doors and windows with professional vigilance. As Mary prepared for bed, her phone chimed with another text from the unknown number. "Last warning. Back off or lose everything." Again. The final word sent a chill through her. Again. It suggested knowledge of her past, of Robert's sudden death, of the lonely years that followed, of all she had lost. Mary forwarded the message to Sarah, then shut off her phone, unwilling to see what might come next. Sleep eluded her. Instead, Mary found herself thinking about the day Duke had saved her life. It had been a Tuesday afternoon, raining steadily. Sarah had dropped off Duke for a grandma visit while she attended a training seminar in Seattle. Mary had been baking when she heard the back door crack open. Duke, dozing by the fireplace, was instantly alert, his posture changing from relaxed pet to working canine in seconds. The intruder, desperate for prescription medications, hadn't expected resistance. He certainly hadn't expected an aging but highly trained police dog to launch at him with such precision. Duke had incapacitated the man without inflicting serious injury, a testament to his training, and kept him pinned until help arrived. Mary remembered the way Duke had returned to her side afterward, his demeanor shifting back to gentle companion as he leaned against her trembling legs. That night, watching him sleep at the foot of her bed, she had made the decision to offer him a retirement home. Now, 2 years later, Duke was once again standing between her and danger. Mary finally dozed off near dawn, her hand resting on Duke's solid presence beside the bed. Morning brought a patrol car driving slowly past her property, the young officer inside waving respectfully. Mary waved back, grateful for Sarah's influence. She was tending her small vegetable garden, Duke lounging nearby, when Kevin's truck pulled into her driveway. "Morning, Mary," he called, approaching with a toolbox. "Thought I'd fix that loose step on your porch while the weather's good." Mary felt a new wariness around her formerly trusted neighbor. "That's not necessary, Kevin. Sarah's sending someone later this week." Kevin's smile didn't waver, but something hardened in his eyes. "No trouble at all? I'm already here." He moved toward the porch, ignoring her protest. Duke rose immediately, placing himself between Kevin and Mary, his posture unmistakably threatening. Kevin stopped, eyeing the dog with new respect. "Seems Duke's a bit protective today," he observed lightly. "Maybe another time." As he returned to his truck, Mary noticed him watching her garden with unusual interest. Following his gaze, she realized he was staring at the freshly turned soil where she'd planted late-season kale. After Kevin left, Mary examined the area more carefully. The soil looked different from how she'd left it the previous day, slightly disturbed, as if something had been buried there. With growing unease, she fetched a trowel and began carefully digging. 6 inches down, her trowel struck something solid. Brushing away soil revealed a small metal box, the kind used for cash or valuables. Mary extracted it cautiously, noting how new it looked despite being buried. Duke whined anxiously as she carried the box to her porch. Using her gardening gloves to avoid contaminating potential evidence, Mary carefully opened the latch. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay a silver charm bracelet. A small card beneath it read, "Elena Davis, 2024. Mary's hands shook as she closed the box and called Sarah. This was evidence, deliberately planted in her garden, perhaps by Kevin himself. But why? To implicate her? To send another warning? Sarah arrived with 2 FBI agents less than an hour later. They photographed the box in situ, then collected it as evidence, their expressions grave. "This is Elena's," Sarah confirmed. "Her mother identified it from photos this morning. It was a 21st birthday gift." "Someone planted it in my garden," Mary said, "and I think that someone was Kevin." One of the agents, a woman in her 40s with shrewd eyes, asked, "How well do you know your neighbor, Mrs. Peterson?" "Not as well as I thought," Mary admitted. "He moved here about 8 years ago. He's been helpful, too helpful maybe, looking back. His company specializes in remote construction," Sarah added. "Cabins, hunting lodges, private retreats." The agents exchanged significant looks. "We'll want to speak with Mr. Richards," the female agent said carefully. "In the meantime, Mrs. Peterson, we'd like to place you under protective surveillance. The planted evidence suggests you're being targeted." Mary glanced at Duke, standing attentively beside her. "I have protection." "With all due respect to your dog," the male agent replied, "whoever we're dealing with has been operating undetected for years. They're sophisticated and dangerous." Eventually, Mary agreed to a compromise. She would stay with Sarah in Port Angeles while the investigation proceeded. As they packed her essentials, the female agent, Special Agent Morales, asked about her nursing career. "Sarah mentioned you treated potential trafficking victims years ago," Morales said. "Would you recognize any of them if shown photographs?" Mary considered this. "Possibly. The girl with the scar, certainly. It was distinctive, a pattern cut into her shoulder blade, almost ritualistic." Agent Morales nodded thoughtfully. "We believe this operation has been active for at least 15 years, possibly longer. They're careful, professional. The victims who escape or are released rarely talk, either from fear or psychological conditioning. Or because no one believes them," Mary added, remembering her own frustrated attempts to advocate for the traumatized women in her care. As they prepared to leave, Mary took a final walk through her garden with Duke. The property that had once been her sanctuary now felt tainted, violated by the knowledge that someone, perhaps Kevin, had walked these grounds with malicious intent, planting evidence while she slept. Duke suddenly stiffened, his attention riveted to the forest edge. Mary followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual among the ancient trees. Yet something had changed, an atmospheric shift she couldn't name but instinctively understood. The forest that had been her refuge, the peaceful backdrop to her retirement, now loomed with menace. "We'll come back," she promised Duke softly, leading him to Sarah's waiting vehicle. "When this is over, we'll reclaim our home." At Sarah's apartment that evening, Mary watched the local news with growing concern. The discovery of the hidden cabin had made headlines, though details were deliberately vague. The reporter stood at the forest trailhead, speaking gravely about an ongoing investigation into missing persons cases, while behind her, law enforcement personnel moved purposefully in and out of the tree line. Sarah returned from a phone call, looking troubled. "They executed a search warrant on Kevin's property this afternoon," she reported. "He wasn't there, and his truck is missing. They're calling him a person of interest." "He's running," Mary concluded. "Maybe." Sarah didn't seem convinced. "Or setting up something else." The FBI forensic team found sophisticated surveillance equipment at his house, including directional microphones pointed at your cabin. The implication was chilling. Kevin had been watching her, listening to her for who knew how long. Had he heard her conversations with Sarah, her midnight phone calls with old nursing colleagues, her occasional talks with Duke when the silence grew too heavy? "There's something else," Sarah continued reluctantly. "They found photographs, dozens of them, women, all young, all seeming captive." She hesitated. "And architectural plans for structures like the cabin we found, but more elaborate, with hidden rooms, escape tunnels, surveillance systems." "A professional operation," Mary murmured, remembering Agent Morales' assessment. "The thing is," Sarah said, her voice dropping, "some of these plans date back 20 years. This operation predates Kevin's arrival here." A cold certainty settled in Mary's chest. "He's not working alone." "No," Sarah agreed grimly. "He's part of something bigger, and from the sophistication of what we're seeing, something with significant resources and protection." Duke, who had been dozing beside the couch, suddenly raised his head, ears perked toward the apartment door. A moment later, a gentle knock sounded. Sarah drew her weapon, motioning Mary to stay back while she approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "Morales," came the reply. "I have an update for you." Sarah checked the peephole before unlocking the door. Agent Morales entered, her expression grave. "We've found another cabin," she announced without preamble. "Similar to the first, but larger, more sophisticated, and recently abandoned." "Where?" Sarah asked. "Less than a mile from your grandmother's property, but in the opposite direction from the first one. Deeper in the forest, completely hidden from aerial surveillance." Morales placed a file on the coffee table. "This operation has been using Olympic National Forest as their staging ground for years, moving victims through a series of these cabins before transport elsewhere." Mary gathered her courage to ask the question burning in her mind. "Have you found Alina?" Morales' expression softened slightly. "Not yet. But we found this." She opened a file to reveal a photograph of a young woman's shoulder blade, marked with a distinctive scarred pattern, an intricate design of intersecting lines and curves. Mary's hand flew to her mouth. "That's it, the scar I treated years ago." "This photo was taken last year," Morales explained. "The victim was found disoriented near a truck stop in Oregon. She couldn't or wouldn't provide details about her captivity, but allowed medical documentation of her injuries." "It's the same pattern," Mary confirmed, studying the photograph with professional detachment despite her churning stomach. "Deliberately inflicted, precise. A brand of some kind." "We think it's a signature," Morales said. "A mark of ownership by whoever is running this operation." Duke, who had maintained a respectful distance from the FBI agent, suddenly moved to Mary's side, pressing against her leg as if sensing her distress. "We need your help, Mrs. Peterson," Morales continued. "Your medical expertise, combined with your experience with these victims years ago, could help us understand what we're dealing with, and perhaps help us find Elena Davis before it's too late." Mary looked at Sarah, then down at Duke, whose steady presence had guided her through the darkest days of her life. The threat against her was real, but so was the opportunity to finally confront a horror she had glimpsed years ago and been powerless to stop. "I'll help however I can," she said firmly. "These women deserve justice, and Elena deserves to come home." The FBI field office in Seattle hummed with controlled urgency. Mary sat at a conference table surrounded by case files, medical photographs, and maps of Olympic National Forest marked with red pins indicating known or suspected cabin locations. Duke lay at her feet, granted special clearance after Agent Morales observed his calming effect on Mary and his continuing protective instincts. "The pattern is evolving," Mary observed, comparing photographs of scarred victims spanning 15 years. "The earlier marks were cruder, less artistic. The recent ones show refinement, precision, almost like a signature that's been perfected over time." Agent Morales nodded, sliding another file across the table. "Our behavioral analyst says the same thing. The person doing this is developing their technique, taking pride in their work. It's not just functional marking anymore. It's become ritualistic." Sarah entered the conference room, her expression tightly controlled. 3 days had passed since Kevin Richards disappeared, and the investigation had expanded dramatically. The discovery of 2 more cabins hidden in the national forest had confirmed they were dealing with a sophisticated trafficking operation that had operated undetected for years. "They've found Kevin's truck," Sarah announced, "abandoned at a trailhead near the Canadian border. They're bringing in search dogs, but he has at least a 12-hour head start." Mary studied the map, noting the location. "He's running north, through the mountains. He knows those forests better than the authorities do." "We'll find him," Agent Morales stated with quiet confidence. "We've alerted Border Patrol and Canadian authorities. His photo is being circulated to every law enforcement agency in the Pacific Northwest." An analyst hurried into the room, tablet in hand. "We've got a match on the fingerprints from the 3rd cabin," she reported. "Thomas Reynolds." Sarah's head snapped up. "The retired detective? The one who buried my grandmother's reports years ago?" The analyst nodded grimly. "The same. We're issuing a warrant for his arrest now." The pieces were falling into place. A corrupt detective who had protected the operation from within the police department, a builder who constructed hidden structures designed for captivity, and at least one other person who performed the ritualistic marking of victims. But they still hadn't identified the mastermind, the person with the resources and connections to maintain such an operation for nearly 2 decades. "What about Elena Davis?" Mary asked, voicing the question that had driven her through exhausting days of analysis. "Do we have any new leads?" Agent Morales hesitated. "Nothing concrete, but based on the pattern we've established, if she's still in the pipeline, she would likely be at one of 2 locations." She indicated areas on the map they hadn't yet searched. "The problem is, we don't have enough personnel to search both simultaneously, and if we choose wrong—" The unspoken implication hung heavily in the air. If they chose wrong, Elena might be moved, or worse, before they could reach her. Mary stood, moving closer to the map. "This area," she said, pointing to the northernmost location. "The victim I treated in 2010, the one with the first scar I documented, she mentioned water, the sound of a waterfall that never stopped." Sarah checked the topographical features. "There's a year-round waterfall in this valley. It's remote, difficult to access." "That's where I'd look first," Mary stated with quiet certainty. Agent Morales studied her thoughtfully before nodding. "I'll redirect resources there immediately." She turned to the assembled team. "Gear up for mountain terrain. We move in 1 hour." Sarah approached her grandmother, concern evident in her expression. "You should rest. You've been at this for days." Mary shook her head. "I'll rest when Elena is safe." She looked down at Duke, who had risen when she stood, ready as always. "We're coming with you." "Absolutely not," Sarah protested. "This is an FBI tactical operation. It's too dangerous." "I'm a trauma nurse," Mary reminded her. "If Elena or any other victims are there, they'll need immediate medical attention, and Duke—" She rested her hand on his solid head. "Duke can track in ways your equipment can't." Before Sarah could argue further, Agent Morales intervened. "She's right about the medical expertise, and that dog has proven his worth repeatedly." She addressed Mary directly. "You'll remain with the support team at the staging area, half a mile from the target location. If we find victims, we'll bring them to you." 4 hours later, Mary sat in a medical support vehicle at the edge of a Forest Service road. The afternoon light filtered through ancient trees as FBI tactical teams moved silently into position around the suspected cabin location. Duke, wearing a specialized K-9 vest provided by the FBI, sat alertly beside her, watching the forest with focused intensity. The radio crackled with coded communications as the teams reported their positions. Sarah had joined one of the tactical units, her experience with forest operations proving valuable. Mary monitored the exchanges with growing tension, understanding enough of the jargon to know they were preparing to breach the target location. Suddenly, Duke stiffened, a low growl building in his throat. Mary looked around, seeing nothing unusual among the emergency vehicles and support personnel. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Duke's attention fixed on the dense forest to their right, away from the direction the tactical teams had taken. His growl deepened, the hair along his spine rising. Mary's instincts, honed by years of emergency room crises, screamed a warning. Something was wrong. She keyed the radio. "Sarah, Duke is alerting to something in the western sector. Something's not right." Before she could elaborate, gunfire erupted in the distance. The radio exploded with urgent communications. "Shots fired, taking fire from the ridge," followed by the controlled chaos of a tactical response. In the confusion, Mary almost missed the slight movement in the underbrush 20 yards away. Duke didn't. The German Shepherd launched into action, bolting toward the threat with frightening speed. Mary heard herself shouting for help as she glimpsed a figure emerging from the trees. A man in camouflage clothing raising what appeared to be a rifle. Duke reached him before he could aim. The retired K-9 slammed into the man with the precision of his training, targeting the arm holding the weapon. Mary heard the distinct crack of bone, followed by a howl of pain as Duke took the man down. 2 FBI agents who had remained at the staging area responded immediately, weapons drawn. Mary recognized the fallen attacker with a shock of horror. Kevin Richards, his face contorted with rage and pain as Duke held him immobilized. "Call off your dog," he snarled as the agent secured him. Mary stood her ground, heart pounding. "Duke, hold," she commanded, using the training phrase Sarah had taught her. Duke maintained his position, pinning Kevin despite the man's struggles. One of the agents radioed the situation while the other secured Kevin's weapon, a high-powered hunting rifle with a scope. "He was setting up a sniper position," the agent reported grimly, "looking right down on our tactical teams." Mary felt cold horror wash over her. Kevin had been planning to ambush the FBI teams from behind. If not for Duke's alertness— The radio crackled again with Sarah's voice, tight with controlled urgency. "We've secured the cabin. Multiple suspects in custody." A pause. "We found her, Grandma. We found Elena. She's alive." Tears sprang to Mary's eyes as relief flooded through her. "Duke, release," she finally commanded. The German Shepherd immediately backed away from Kevin, returning to Mary's side as the agents handcuffed the cursing man. "You should have minded your own business, Mary," Kevin spat as they dragged him toward a vehicle. "You have no idea what you've done, who you're dealing with." Mary met his gaze steadily. "I know exactly what you are," she replied, her voice strengthened by decades of confronting human suffering. "I've seen your handiwork. I've treated your victims." Something flickered in Kevin's eyes, surprise perhaps, or uncertainty. Before he could respond, the agents shoved him into the vehicle and slammed the door. Minutes later, medical evacuation helicopters thundered overhead, landing in a small clearing. Mary grabbed her medical bag and hurried toward them, Duke at her heels. The organized chaos of a medical evacuation unfolded around her. Stretchers being unloaded, paramedics calling out vital signs, agents securing the perimeter. And then Mary saw her, a painfully thin young woman with matted brown hair strapped to a stretcher. Despite her condition, Elena Davis's eyes were alert, scanning her surroundings with wary vigilance. Mary approached slowly, making her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Elena, I'm Mary. I'm a nurse. You're safe now." Elena's gaze fixed on Mary, then shifted to Duke. Something in her expression softened at the sight of the dog. They said a dog found me," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Several dogs helped," Mary acknowledged, beginning a gentle assessment of the young woman's condition, "including this one. His name is Duke." As Mary worked, checking vital signs and noting injuries for the receiving hospital, she maintained a soft monologue explaining each touch before it happened. Elena remained tense but cooperative, her eyes frequently returning to Duke, who had settled into a calm, watchful position nearby. "Can I—" Elena hesitated. "Can I pet him?" Mary nodded, signaling Duke to approach the stretcher. With remarkable gentleness, the retired canine moved closer, allowing Elena to weakly extend her hand to his fur. "The others," Elena whispered as she stroked Duke's head. "There were others." "We know," Mary assured her. "The FBI is searching for them now. You helped us find them, Elena. You survived. You fought." Tears filled Elena's eyes. "I tried to call for help with the phone. They caught me, but I hid it. Broke it so they couldn't see who I called." "We found it," Mary told her. "That phone led us to you." The paramedics signaled it was time to load Elena into the helicopter. As they prepared to lift the stretcher, Elena suddenly grabbed Mary's hand with surprising strength. "Don't let them separate us," she pleaded, her eyes wild with sudden panic. "The others, we need to stay together. We protect each other." Mary squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I understand. I'll tell them. You won't be alone, Elena. I promise." As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Elena to the trauma center in Seattle, Sarah appeared at Mary's side, her tactical gear dusty and her expression grim but triumphant. "5," she reported, having to raise her voice over the helicopter's retreating noise. "5 women rescued, all alive, all with the same marking." She looked at Duke with undisguised admiration. "And if not for him, we might have walked into an ambush." Mary knelt beside Duke, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what they'd accomplished and how close they'd come to disaster. "He never stopped being a police dog," she said, wrapping her arms around his solid frame, "even in retirement." "Mom always said you can't retire a hero's heart," Sarah replied softly, referencing her long-dead mother. "Just give it a new mission." The forest around them was now fully alive with law enforcement activity, evidence technicians processing the cabin, tactical teams securing a perimeter, medical personnel attending to the rescued women. In the midst of the controlled chaos, Mary felt a moment of clarity. "Kevin wasn't working alone," she said, rising to her feet. "He was the builder, the facilitator, but someone else is running this operation, someone with more authority, more connections." Sarah nodded grimly. "We found documents in the cabin, financial records, transport schedules. This is bigger than we thought, stretching up into Canada and down the entire West Coast. The FBI is already coordinating with multiple jurisdictions." "The man who does the marking," Mary pressed. "Did you find him?" "Not yet," Sarah admitted. "But we've identified him through Elena's description. Dr. James Harlan, a former plastic surgeon who lost his license 15 years ago for ethics violations. He's been off the grid since then." Mary felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. "A surgeon. That explains the precision, the evolution of the technique." Their conversation was interrupted by Agent Morales, approaching with purposeful strides. "Mrs. Peterson, your medical assistance was invaluable," she said. "The paramedics say your initial assessment probably saved critical time for 2 of the victims." Mary acknowledged the praise with a nod. "What happens now?" "We process this scene and continue searching for additional locations," Morales explained. "Based on the documents we've recovered, there are at least 3 more such facilities in the Olympic Peninsula alone." She hesitated. "We've also found evidence suggesting local law enforcement infiltration beyond just Reynolds. This operation has had protection from inside the system for years." The implications were staggering: a trafficking network with the resources to build hidden facilities throughout the national forest, the medical expertise to systematically mark victims, and the connections to corrupt law enforcement for protection. "I want to help," Mary stated firmly. "These women will need specialized medical and psychological care. I have experience with trauma victims. And Duke," she glanced down at the German shepherd, standing alertly at her side, "Duke has already proven his value." Agent Morales studied them thoughtfully. "We could use your expertise, both of you. But Mrs. Peterson, I have to be clear. This investigation has become even more dangerous. Whoever is running this operation has significant resources and has just lost valuable assets. They won't take that lightly." "I understand the risks," Mary replied with quiet determination. "But I've been treating the aftermath of their handiwork for years without knowing it. Now that I do know, I can't turn away." The agent nodded, respect evident in her expression. "Then welcome to the task force, Mrs. Peterson." She extended her hand, which Mary shook firmly. As they prepared to leave the forest crime scene, Mary took a moment to stand at the edge of the clearing, looking out at the ancient trees that had hidden so much suffering. Duke pressed against her leg, a solid reminder of loyalty and protection. "We're coming for them, Duke," she whispered, resting her hand on his head. "All of them." In the distance, the sun began its descent behind the Olympic Mountains, casting long shadows across a forest that had kept its secrets for far too long. But secrets, like shadows, could not survive when fully exposed to the light, and Mary Peterson, with Duke at her side, was prepared to bring everything into the harsh clarity of day, whatever the cost. Seattle's Harborview Medical Center stood sentinel on its hilltop, its windows gleaming in the morning light. Mary moved through the secured wing with practiced efficiency, her nurse's ID badge prominently displayed, Duke padding silently beside her on his therapy dog vest and credentials. 3 days had passed since the rescue operation, and the 5 women recovered from the cabin had been transferred here under FBI protection. Elena Davis occupied the corner room, its windows overlooking Puget Sound. When Mary entered, the young woman was sitting up in bed, her hollow gaze fixed on the distant water. Healing bruises mapped the visible portions of her arms, while bandages covered the ritualistic marking on her shoulder blade. "Good morning, Elena," Mary said softly, announcing her presence. Duke moved forward at Mary's gentle command, placing his head on the edge of the bed. Elena's expression softened at the sight of the German shepherd. "Duke," she whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers to stroke his head. It was the most animated Mary had seen her since the rescue. "How are you feeling today?" Mary asked, checking the medical chart hanging at the foot of the bed. "They want me to talk to a psychiatrist," Elena replied, her voice still raspy from weeks of disuse. "I don't want strangers in my head." Mary nodded understandingly. "Trauma changes us, Elena. Sometimes we need help finding our way back." She arranged the young woman's pillows, adjusting them with the practiced hands of a career nurse. "The psychiatrist isn't there to invade your privacy. She's there to give you tools to process what happened." Elena's gaze returned to the window. "They're still out there, aren't they? The others who ran this place?" "Yes," Mary acknowledged honestly. "But we're closing in on them. Kevin Richards is cooperating with investigators, trying to reduce his sentence, and Thomas Reynolds was arrested yesterday." A shadow of fear crossed Elena's face. "There were others. Men who would visit, who would—" She trailed off, unable to continue. Mary gently placed her hand over Elena's. "You don't have to talk about that right now, but when you're ready, Anything you can tell us might help find the others who were taken." Elena nodded, almost imperceptibly. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Have you found him? The doctor? The one who—" She gestured vaguely toward her bandaged shoulder. "Not yet," Mary admitted, "but we know who he is. Dr. James Harland. He can't hide forever." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah entered, wearing civilian clothes, but with her badge visible on her belt. Her expression was a careful mask, but Mary recognized the controlled excitement in her granddaughter's eyes. "How's our patient today?" Sarah asked, smiling at Elena. "Better," Mary replied. "She's eaten breakfast, and her vitals are improving." Sarah nodded, then addressed Elena directly. "I have something I'd like to show you if you feel up to it." She pulled a small tablet from her bag, tapping the screen before handing it to Elena. "We've been searching missing persons databases, trying to match the other women recovered with you. This was flagged this morning." Elena stared at the screen, her breath catching. On it was a younger version of herself, perhaps 15 or 16, smiling beside a slightly older girl with the same dark hair and heart-shaped face. That's me," Elena whispered. "But I don't remember her." She looked up at Sarah in confusion. "Who is she?" Sarah exchanged a glance with Mary before answering. "Her name was Jessica Peterson. She disappeared 20 years ago when she was 18, the same night her parents, my parents, were murdered." Elena's hand trembled as she touched the smiling face on the screen. "I don't understand." "DNA doesn't lie," Sarah said gently. "The preliminary results came back this morning. You're Elena Davis because that's the name your adoptive parents gave you after they adopted you through an unregistered agency. But you were born Eliza Peterson. You're my sister." The tablet slipped from Elena's fingers, caught by Sarah before it could fall. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible. I have parents. I grew up in Montana. I have memories." "Implanted memories," Mary interjected softly. "A technique used on trafficking victims, especially young ones. They give you a new history, a new identity. Over time, it becomes your reality." Duke, sensing Elena's distress, pressed closer to the bed. Elena's fingers tangled in his fur as if seeking an anchor to reality. "If what you're saying is true," she finally said, "then my entire life has been a lie, everything I remember." "Not everything," Sarah assured her. "Just the beginning, everything you've accomplished, everything you've learned. That's still real. That's still you." Elena or Eliza closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I want to remember. I need to know who I really am." Mary felt her heart breaking for this young woman whose identity had been stolen along with her freedom. "It might come back," she said gently. "With time, with therapy, and even if it doesn't, you can build new memories, true ones." The emotional moment was interrupted by Mary's phone. Seeing Agent Morales' number, she excused herself to take the call in the hallway. "We found another cabin," Morales reported without preamble. "This one's different. Larger, more sophisticated. We think it might be their main processing facility." "Any victims?" Mary asked. "No, but we found medical equipment, surgical supplies. This is where Harlan did his work." A pause. "We also found something else. Records going back 20 years. Names, dates, destinations." Mary leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. "A ledger?" "Essentially, yes, including records of the attack on Sarah's parents. This wasn't random, Mrs. Peterson. They were targeted specifically because they were investigating child disappearances as part of a charity organization." The pieces clicked into terrible alignment in Mary's mind. They were getting too close to the operation. "Exactly. And there's more. The records indicate high-level protection. Judges, police chiefs, even a state senator. This organization has been protected from the highest levels." Mary thought of Duke, waiting loyally inside Elena's room, and of Sarah, finally reunited with a sister she'd lost 2 decades ago. "What do you need from me?" "Your expertise," Morales replied. "We're setting up a task force command center at the Seattle field office. With your medical background and your knowledge of the case, you could help us interpret what we're finding." "I'll be there," Mary promised, "but I need to finish here first. Eliza, just received life-altering news." After disconnecting, Mary returned to the hospital room to find Sarah sitting on the edge of the bed, holding Elena's hand as they looked through more photographs. Duke remained in his position of comfort, his steady presence a counterpoint to the emotional turmoil in the room. "I have to go," Mary said gently. "FBI business. But I'll be back this evening." Elena looked up, sudden panic in her eyes. "You're leaving? Both of you?" "I'm staying," Sarah assured her. "I've taken personal leave." Mary approached the bed, gently squeezing Elena's shoulder. "You're safe here. There are agents outside your door and throughout the hospital, and Sarah will be with you." Elena nodded reluctantly. "Will you take Duke? The other women, they respond to him. He makes them feel safe." Mary felt a surge of pride in her canine companion. Since the rescue, Duke had indeed shown remarkable intuition with the traumatized women, providing comfort where human interaction was still too frightening. "Of course," she agreed, "Duke and I will visit the others before we leave." As they made their rounds to the other 4 victims, Mary observed each woman's condition with professional detachment layered over deep compassion. All bore the same ritualistic marking, though in various stages of healing. All showed signs of prolonged captivity, malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, muscle atrophy. Yet in each room she witnessed the same remarkable transformation when Duke approached, fear momentarily replaced by comfort, withdrawal giving way to connection, however brief. In the final room, a young woman named Melissa, the Portland victim, spoke for the first time since her rescue. As she stroked Duke's ears, she whispered, "There were others, many others. They took them away in trucks." Mary knelt beside the bed. "Where did they take them, Melissa? Do you remember?" The young woman's eyes clouded with fear. "North. They said they were going to Canada. Special clients there." Mary pressed gently. "When did this happen?" 3 days before you found us. A truck came. They took 6 girls." Melissa's fingers tightened in Duke's fur. "One fought back. The doctor, he punished her. In front of us, with his knife." Her hand moved unconsciously to her own scarred shoulder. Mary felt cold rage building within her, a surprising emotion she hadn't experienced in decades. "You're helping us find them, Melissa. You're very brave." Leaving the hospital, Mary and Duke made their way to the waiting FBI vehicle. As they drove toward the field office, Mary gazed out at the Seattle skyline, thinking of all the women who had passed through this city over the years. Invisible, voiceless, marked like cattle for transport. "We're not finished, Duke," she murmured, resting her hand on his neck. "Not by a long shot." The German shepherd looked up at her with solemn eyes that seemed to understand exactly what was at stake. Together they had helped rescue 5 women and reunite a family torn apart 20 years ago. But the ledger Morales had described suggested hundreds more victims and conspirators in positions of power who had allowed it to happen. The reckoning had only just begun. The FBI field office buzzed with controlled chaos. Extra agents had been brought in from across the country, tables covered with evidence boxes, walls plastered with photographs, timelines, and maps. Mary sat at a workstation surrounded by medical records, Duke lying vigilantly at her feet. For 5 days she had been analyzing the medical documentation recovered from the cabin, piecing together the horrific puzzle of Dr. James Harlan's work. "The markings evolved," she explained to Agent Morales and the behavioral analyst, pointing to photographs arranged chronologically. "The earliest ones from 2004 were crude, functional rather than artistic. By 2010, when I treated those 3 victims, he had developed a more distinctive style. The recent ones show mastery. The work of someone who considers himself an artist. A signature, the behavioral analyst noted. He's marking his territory, his property, but also creating a brand, Mary added. Look at how the basic design remains consistent while becoming more elaborate. This isn't just about marking victims, it's about creating a recognizable product. The implications sickened her, but Mary maintained her professional detachment, a skill honed through decades in the trauma unit. The women weren't just being trafficked. They were being branded with a signature that certain buyers recognized and valued. Sarah entered the conference room, dark circles under her eyes testifying to sleepless nights spent at her sister's bedside. Elena remembered something, she announced. A conversation she overheard between Harland and someone he called the director. They mentioned a delivery date, June 10th, and a location called The Sanctuary. Agent Morales straightened. June 10th is 4 days from now. Did she hear anything else about this sanctuary? Only that it's on an island, Sarah replied, accessible only by boat or seaplane. The intelligence analyst at the computer immediately began searching property records for island estates in the region. There are dozens of private islands in the San Juans and the Canadian Gulf Islands, she reported, many with restricted access and minimal documentation. Cross-section with the ledger, Morales instructed. Look for patterns in delivery locations. Mary returned to her medical analysis while the search proceeded. Hours passed as she documented the evolution of Harlan's technique, creating a timeline that might help identify unmarked victims. Duke occasionally raised his head, alert to changes in the room's energy, but remaining steadfastly at her side. Late in the afternoon, the analyst called for attention. I think I've found something, she announced. A private island in the Canadian Gulf Islands, purchased 15 years ago by a shell corporation that traces back through several layers to a non-profit called the Sanctuary for Healing and Spiritual Growth. The non-profit's board includes 3 names that appear in the ledger as clients. Agent Morales immediately moved to examine the findings, get satellite imagery, and contact Canadian authorities. We need their cooperation for any operation in their waters. Mary studied the map location the analyst had identified. The island was remote, even by Gulf Island standards, with deep water approaches that would make surveillance difficult. If this is their destination, she observed, they'll need to transport the women by boat, probably from a marina on our side of the border, then through the islands to avoid border checkpoints. Morales nodded grimly. Exactly what I was thinking. We need to identify likely departure points. As the team expanded their investigation, Mary watched the methodical build of an operation unlike anything she'd ever witnessed. Law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border were being quietly engaged, Marine units alerted, surveillance positions established at marinas throughout the Puget Sound. Kevin Richards, facing multiple life sentences, had become increasingly cooperative as the extent of the evidence against him became clear. His detailed testimony had already led to the identification of 3 more cabin locations and the arrest of Thomas Reynolds' replacement in the police department, another officer compromised by the trafficking organization. Yet Dr. Harlan remained elusive, and the mysterious director had yet to be identified. That evening, Mary returned to the hospital to find Elena sitting in a chair by the window, looking stronger than she had since her rescue. Sarah had brought her sister some personal items, comfortable clothes, a hairbrush, a small stuffed animal that had somehow survived 20 years in Sarah's possession. "It was yours," Sarah explained as Mary entered. "Your favorite when you were little." Elena, now beginning to accept her identity as Eliza, held the worn rabbit with careful hands. "I don't remember it," she admitted, "but it feels familiar somehow." Mary observed the sisters with measured optimism. Elena's physical recovery was progressing well, but the psychological wounds would take much longer to heal. The revelation of her true identity had unleashed conflicting emotions, grief for a life stolen, confusion about her constructed memories, and fragile hope for reconnection with her only remaining family. "The FBI made progress today," Mary shared, settling into a chair while Duke made his customary greeting to Elena, resting his head briefly on her lap before lying down between the sisters. "Your information about the sanctuary may have given us a location." Elena tensed visibly. "Are they going there, to the island?" "They're preparing an operation," Mary confirmed, "but they need more information to ensure they can rescue any victims safely." Elena's fingers tightened around the stuffed rabbit. "I might," she began, hesitating. "I might remember more if I could see some of the places. The cabins where they kept us." Sarah and Mary exchanged concerned glances. "The cabins are crime scenes," Sarah explained gently, "and going back there might trigger severe trauma responses," Mary finished. "Your recovery needs to be the priority right now." Elena's expression hardened with unexpected determination. "My recovery won't mean anything if those men are still out there, still hurting others." She looked directly at Mary. "You understand, don't you? You've seen trauma victims before. Some need safety and distance, others need closure. Action." Mary recognized the steel beneath Elena's fragile exterior, the same determination that had led her to hide a phone, to resist her captors even knowing the consequences, perhaps the same strength that had allowed her to survive 20 years of a constructed identity. "I'll speak with Agent Morales," Mary said finally, "but no promises, and only if the medical team approves." Later that night, as Mary and Duke returned to the safe house where they'd been staying since the threats began, she found herself thinking about Elena's request. As a nurse, she understood the therapeutic value of confronting trauma sites under controlled circumstances. As a woman who had faced her own losses, she recognized the need for agency after powerlessness. Duke suddenly stiffened beside her as they approached the safe house door. A low growl rumbled in his chest, stopping Mary in her tracks. The house appeared undisturbed, but Mary had learned to trust Duke's instincts implicitly. She retreated quickly to the FBI vehicle that had brought them, alerting the agent inside. The ensuing search revealed a sophisticated listening device planted in Mary's temporary bedroom, evidence that someone had breached FBI security protocols. More disturbing was the small package left on her pillow, a piece of gauze stained with blood wrapped around a charm from Elena's bracelet. Agent Morales arrived within 30 minutes, her expression grave as the evidence technicians processed the scene. "This wasn't random," she stated, examining the charm under an evidence bag. "This is a message. They're letting us know they can reach anyone, anywhere." "Including Elena?" Mary said quietly, fighting to control her trembling. Duke pressed against her leg, offering silent support. "We're moving you both to a secure location," Morales decided, "and increasing security at the hospital." In the car heading to the new safe house, Mary's phone rang with Sarah's number. Her granddaughter's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Someone was here," Sarah reported. "A man in scrubs walked right into Elena's room while I was getting coffee. A nurse spotted him and challenged him. He fled before security could respond." "Is Elena all right?" Mary asked, heart pounding. "Physically, yes, but she's terrified. She says it was him, Dr. Harlan. She recognized his hands." Mary relayed the information to Agent Morales, who immediately redirected their vehicle to the hospital. As they sped through the night, Mary fought rising dread. The organization wasn't just watching. They were actively infiltrating secure locations, sending clear warnings that no one was beyond their reach. At the hospital, they found Elena being transferred to a different room under heavy guard. Sarah stood nearby, her face pale but composed, her hand resting on her service weapon. "He came to finish the marking," Elena told Mary once they were alone in the new room. She pulled down the collar of her hospital gown to reveal a fresh cut on her collarbone, a small, precise line that would have been the beginning of a new design. "He said time was running out, but he couldn't leave his work incomplete." Mary gently examined the wound, which had been treated by hospital staff. "Did he say anything else? Anything about the sanctuary or the upcoming transport?" Elena nodded, her eyes haunted. "He said preparations were complete, the final shipment would proceed as scheduled, that high-value merchandise was already being prepared for transit." She swallowed hard. "He called me defective, damaged goods. He said he was doing me a courtesy by finishing his work, even though I was no longer marketable." The clinical detachment in her recounting broke Mary's heart, but also reinforced her determination. This young woman, her granddaughter's sister, a survivor against impossible odds, deserved justice, as did all the others who had suffered under this organization's control. "We'll stop them," Mary promised, taking Elena's cold hand between her own. "And we'll make sure they can never hurt anyone again." Duke moved closer, resting his head on the edge of Elena's bed. In the sterile hospital room, surrounded by guards and monitors and the clinical trappings of recovery, man's ancient partnership with canine offered what technology and protocols could not: unconditional protection, silent understanding, and the promise that she would not face the darkness alone. Dawn broke over Puget Sound with muted silver light illuminating the flotilla of unmarked vessels positioning themselves around the maritime approaches to Seattle. Mary stood on the deck of a Coast Guard cutter, a borrowed FBI windbreaker protecting her from the pre-dawn chill. Duke sat alertly beside her, his specialized canine vest equipped with a tracking device, a precaution insisted upon by Agent Morales. The operation had come together with remarkable speed following Dr. Harlan's appearance at the hospital. Elena's information, combined with intensified surveillance of suspected departure points, had confirmed that a yacht registered to one of the sanctuary board members was being prepared at a private marina north of the city. Canadian authorities had simultaneously positioned assets around the suspected island destination. "Remember the agreement," Agent Morales reminded Mary, joining her at the railing. "You and Duke remain on this vessel. Your medical expertise will be needed once we intercept the transport, but you are not to participate in any tactical operation." Mary nodded, watching the careful choreography of law enforcement watercraft taking position. After Harlan's breach of hospital security, Elena had been moved to an undisclosed location under heavy guard. With Sarah remaining protectively at her side, the sisters were building fragile bridges across 20 years of separation, finding common ground in shared determination to bring down the organization that had destroyed their family. "They're moving," announced the Coast Guard captain, listening to updates through his earpiece. "Target vessel departing dock with approximately 10 individuals visible on deck. No positive ID on Harlan yet." Mary's heart raced as the operation transitioned from preparation to action. Across the water she could just make out the sleek white yacht powering smoothly into the Sound, unaware of the net closing around it. "Remember," Morales instructed the assembled team, "our priority is rescuing potential victims. We believe at least 6 women are being transported. They may be sedated or restrained. Approach with caution." As the yacht reached the predetermined interception point, Coast Guard vessels suddenly appeared from concealed positions, lights flashing, surrounding the target. Through binoculars, Mary watched the confusion on deck as uniformed personnel boarded from multiple directions. "They are offering no resistance," reported the captain. 6 individuals in custody, no sign of Harlan, proceeding to search below decks." Minutes stretched into an agonizing half-hour as the search continued. Finally, the radio crackled with news. "We've located victims, 6 women, sedated but alive. Medical assistance required immediately." The Coast Guard cutter surged forward, closing the distance to the yacht. Mary gathered her medical supplies, her decades of nursing experience focusing her mind on the task ahead. When they pulled alongside, she followed the designated path aboard, Duke maintaining perfect position at her heel. The yacht's luxurious interior belied its gruesome purpose. In a converted cargo hold beneath the main deck, 6 young women lay on narrow bunks, intravenous lines delivering what appeared to be sedation. Each woman bore a fresh bandage on her shoulder blade, Harlan's signature marking newly applied. Mary moved efficiently from one victim to another, assessing vital signs, removing IVs, checking pupillary responses. The women were alive but heavily sedated, their shallow breathing the only movement in the eerily silent hold. They were being prepared for delivery, observed Agent Morales, examining a locked cabinet now forced open to reveal pharmaceuticals and medical equipment. Transport sedation, according to the labels. As Mary worked, Duke suddenly raised his head, attention focusing on a section of paneled wall. His posture shifted subtly, the alert position Mary had come to recognize as indication of something hidden. "Duke's found something," she said, nodding toward the dog's focused stance. FBI agents examined the wall, discovering a concealed compartment. Inside, they found documentation, transport schedules, financial records, and most significantly, a laptop computer. "This could be the mother lode," Morales said, securing the evidence. "Names, contacts, the entire network." Mary continued tending to the victims, noting with professional detachment the identical fresh markings visible beneath their bandages. Harlan's work had evolved, again, the design now more intricate, incorporating what appeared to be personalized elements unique to each victim. "They were special orders," explained one of the yacht crewmen who had turned cooperative upon arrest. "Each girl modified to client specifications." Mary controlled her revulsion, focusing instead on the medical needs of the women. As Coast Guard medics arrived to assist, she provided clinical assessments, recommended treatment protocols, and ensured the victims were stabilized for transport to the hospital. Hours later, back at the FBI command center, the full impact of their operation began to emerge. The yacht's captain had provided detailed information about the sanctuary, confirming it as a private island retreat where wealthy clients could select merchandise in luxurious surroundings. More damning still was the evidence recovered from the laptop, which contained encrypted communications reaching into the highest levels of regional government. "The director," Morales announced grimly, entering the conference room where Mary waited with Sarah. "We've identified him, State Senator William Chambers. He's been running this operation for over 20 years, using his political connections to provide protection and his nonprofit foundation to launder proceeds." Sarah exhaled sharply. "Chambers. He attended my police academy graduation, gave a speech about public service and justice." "The perfect cover," Morales noted. "A respected public figure above suspicion." She turned to Mary. "We're moving on his residence and offices simultaneously. Canadian authorities are securing the island facility." "And Harlan?" Mary asked. "Still at large, but we've issued alerts nationwide. His photo is at every border crossing, airport, and train station." Mary thought of the 6 women now receiving treatment, lives interrupted, bodies violated, futures uncertain. She thought of Elena, slowly reclaiming her identity as Eliza, piecing together the fragments of a stolen life. And she thought of all the others who had passed through this organization's hands over 2 decades. Hundreds, according to the ledger, many likely still living with the physical and psychological scars of their captivity. "What happens to the women?" she asked quietly. "Comprehensive care," Morales assured her. "Medical, psychological, social services, and when they're ready, the opportunity to help build cases against their captors." Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. She checked it, her expression softening slightly. "Elena wants to see you," she told Mary. "Both of you." She nodded toward Duke, who had maintained his vigilant position throughout the day's events. As they prepared to leave the command center, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Agents rushed past, responding to urgent communications. "They've found him," announced an analyst, bursting into the room. "Harlan. He was attempting to board a private plane at a small airstrip north of the city." "Is he in custody?" Morales demanded. "Yes, ma'am. Being transported here now." Mary felt a complex wave of emotions: relief, vindication, and an unexpected hollow sensation where white-hot anger had burned for days. Justice was proceeding, but the damage inflicted could never be fully undone. Outside the federal building, spring sunshine illuminated a world continuing its normal rhythms. Pedestrians hurrying along sidewalks, traffic flowing through intersections, boats crossing the Sound, all unaware of the darkness that had operated in their midst for years, and all unaware of the extraordinary partnership between an aging nurse, a retired police dog, and the women who had survived to tell their story. The reckoning had begun, but the healing would take much longer. There comes a time in our lives when we believe our greatest contributions lie behind us. We've raised our families, built our careers, and settled into the quieter rhythms of our later years. Mary Peterson thought the same, that her days of making a difference had passed with her nursing career. Yet life had other plans. When a burned phone appeared in the forest, it wasn't just evidence she discovered, but purpose. In the twilight of her life, Mary's experience, wisdom, and compassion became the very tools needed to combat an evil that had flourished in shadow. Her partnership with Duke, a loyal companion also considered past his prime, reminds us that our value doesn't diminish with age. Sometimes it's precisely our years of accumulated knowledge that make us indispensable. As you reflect on Mary's journey, consider the wealth of experience you carry, the instincts you've honed over decades, the wisdom that only time can grant. Our communities need these gifts now more than ever. The world may try to tell us our most meaningful days have passed, but Mary's story tells us differently. Sometimes it's only in our golden years that we discover what we were truly meant to do all along. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.